again and welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at snow anchors, which are really essential if you're traveling on glacier and you might have a crevasse fall scenario where you need to rescue someone. It's also essential if you're going to be traveling on steep snow slopes or where there could be ice and you might need to establish running protection to protect your party from all falling together in the event no one is able to perform team arrest. Specifically, we're going to be looking at three different anchors divided into two types. The first type of anchor is a vertically placed anchor. You can vertically place an anchor in standard picket mode, where you're going to clip the top. You can also use a mid-clip picket, where you are actually clipping a portion halfway down the picket but placing it vertically. The other type of anchor that you might be familiar with is a Deadman anchor, which can be done not only with a picket, but can also be done with an ice axe, ski poles, sometimes even backpacks or other makeshift anchors. So let's take a closer look at how to make these anchors and at some of their applications. Okay, we're going to take a look at the first anchor, which is probably the simplest to construct, which is a standard vertically placed picket. And this is an old style SMC picket. SMC pickets are nice because they have a tapered end, but MSR pickets will work too. If you ever happen to be working overseas in, say, South America or the Himalayas, or maybe even in Russia, you'll find it's very common, instead of to have this T shape, you might have just a standard 90-degree angle, and those are sometimes called snow bars. Can be placed in a very similar way, tend to be thinner material, actually steel instead of aluminum, tend to be sharp, which is really helpful if you're going through hard neve, something like that. Sometimes you can even place them in soft ice that's reasonably aerated. So thinking about the type of material you're bringing for the specific environment is good. Here in the Pacific Northwest, aircraft and aluminum, SMC pickets, MSR pickets tend to work quite well. The snow is soft enough. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my runner off, and that's just to ensure, in case I miss the picket while I'm pounding it, I don't impact my softer material. And the other reason is sometimes when you pound in, if you're pounding into a harder ice layer and you are attached to this top hole here, you can also damage your soft goods when they're attached to that hole. It's a really minor point. It's not that big of a safety issue, and if you have a permanently attached piece of material there, I would just pound it in and not worry about it too much. So what I'm aiming for here is not to go in dead vertical. So I typically will find what vertical looks like to me relative to the snowpack, and then I will tilt it back. Now, different organizations recommend different angles. The standard angle recommended in the United States commonly for a vertically placed picket was about 10 degrees back from vertical. And when we're talking about that 10 degrees, what we're looking at is the angle between the picket and the surface of the snow right here. Okay, so this would be vertical, and that would be probably right around 10 degrees back, so not a great degree. You may read that the Chamonix Guide School, they did some testing, and they found that 20 to 25 degrees back increased holding power by up to 40% over a vertically placed picket. Okay, so not necessarily over a 10-degree back picket, but so I say somewhere between 10 and 25 degrees back. You're not going to get out your protractor in an emergency and measure this angle. So I'm going to angle that back somewhere in that region there. And I have a hammer. An ice hammer is really nice to have, but you can also use your ice axe in two different ways. You can use the adze tool, and you can pound with the back of the adze, or you can turn it sideways. In the event of an emergency, I would probably turn it sideways, simply because using the adze tool, you don't have a lot of leverage. Not quite as much leverage as you do in more of like a hammer format. And it's possible, yeah, you ding up your ice axe and things like that, but not really a big deal. And getting a few nicks on your solid ice axe should not make a difference. If you are carrying an ultralight ice axe, such as one of those Camp Nano ice axes or something like that, then probably not a great tool to place pickets. Those can easily be broken, whether you're trying to pound with the adze tool or whether you're trying to pound with the side of the head like this. Here, nice hammer on the back of this pencil tool, no problem. Okay? So what I'm looking for as I pound this picket is ideally every stroke results in a similar amount of progress with this picket traveling into the surface of the snow. If I hit it with a hammer and it goes in pretty quickly, that could mean that I've met some soft snow. Maybe there's a weak layer within the snowpack that it just went right through, and that may not be a very strong placement. So here it's May, early May. The snowpack is relatively laden with water. It's condensed. It's starting to metamorphose potentially if we're still getting cold nights at our particular altitude, and we can have pretty strong picket placement. So this one is sliding in fairly well. The snow is still pretty soft, so it's not nearly as strong as this placement would be, say, up on a glacier in mid to late summer. It could be a much, much stronger placement, but pretty good overall. I still had to pound it in. And now I'm going to attach my material. So the way I attach my material is partly a matter of preference and partly a matter of application. If I was going to be doing crevasse rescue, I may choose to girth hitch just beyond the sow bar into this top hole here, just like so. Pass this through, and then pass that around, keeping the sow bar up and close to the top of the picket, and that saves me this non-locking carabiner and ensures a solid attachment that's not going to come out under any circumstances. Someone trips over it, anything like that. This gets pounded further into the snowpack to get past the soft layer. I'm not at all worried about a carabiner opening up. However, if I'm using this for running protection, then I may just clip this in and not really worry about having it girth hitched in. But obviously girth hitch would work for running protection as well, especially if you have this permanently girth hitched onto your tool. That would be fine. Okay? From here, you just want to be mindful of your direction of pull. So in this T-shaped picket, I've aligned the direction of pull so that the lower part of the T, you could say like the shaft of the T, is pointing toward the direction that my load is going to be taken onto my anchor. Okay, so let's take a look at what's happening here. So this picket has been placed and left in place for a little bit less than an hour. And right around the picket, you can see light has hit the picket, refracted, and started to melt some of the snow around. But also this metal doesn't have the same albedo or reflective properties as the snow. So it's absorbing a little bit more of the solar energy, heating up this piece of metal, and this picket you can see is quite loose in the snow. It started to turn a lot of that snow to water, and if that water doesn't travel into the snowpack and refreeze because it's too warm outside, then this picket placement becomes weaker and weaker and weaker. In addition, the water that's created can infiltrate the snowpack, and sometimes it can break bonds immediately around the picket and soften the snow. So anytime you're going to be leaving a picket in place for more than a few minutes at a time, for instance, you're doing crevasse rescue, which can take quite a bit of time, or you're setting a top rope anchor, maybe you're doing some rescue practice, or you're doing some ice climbing that has a snow top out, then you want to make sure to insulate this picket from solar energy. There's a few simple ways to do that. An obvious simple way would be to gather snow around the picket, provided it's not in an area you've work hardened, and stack it up. Okay, so that's going to be a good insulator with snow itself. The other thing that you can do is set a backpack on top after you've stacked this up. The same process should be done if you're working with ice screws to build an anchor. Ice screws being made of metal will also absorb more solar radiation than the surrounding snowpack and result in melt out of your metal tools. Okay, one other thing that it's important to keep in mind when you're talking about snow anchors is the direction of pull and where the pull should come from relative to the distance from the snowpack. So when I place this picket, sometimes what can happen is you might encounter an ice layer as you go down. So I'm going to pull this back, 10 to 20 degrees, 10 to 25 degrees back from vertical, pound this in, okay? As I go down, as I get to this point right here, I might notice that it's not going in anymore. Okay? That might be as good as I can get. So obviously relying on one placement partially set is not ideal. But in the event that that's all you get, then it's very important that you clip as close to the snowpack as possible. And that the direction of pull should remain on the snowpack and never up or at an angle. So let's take a look at what can happen as long as the direction of pull remains along the snowpack. Even in a half placement here, you can see it's pretty strong. Another thing I can do to help improve that placement is to place my foot there right in front to make sure that this Dyneema runner never rises up. Okay? However, if that angle of pull starts to change and starts to come up, the greater that angle becomes, the more likely it is that this placement is going to fail, because of course this angle now has negated the angle at which I've put the picket in. So before, the angle here would have been greater than 90 degrees, and once this comes up, it makes this angle 90 degrees or less, and especially once it gets less, it can really just start to pull this picket right out without that much force. So very, very important to clip low and keep the angle of pull along the snowpack, if not down and into the snowpack, to sink that picket further, which we're going to address when we look at mid-clip pickets and how that can actually make a stronger placement in specific circumstances. Okay, the next picket I'm going to talk about is a mid-clip picket. Now, mid-clips are more of a modern style of picket used in the United States. They've been used for quite some time outside the United States. And MSR is now making a mid-clip picket with a permanently attached cable. SMC has made a mid-clip cable option available for quite some time that can attach to any of the holes in the picket. And Yates has also had a mid-clip picket out for a while. So the idea behind a mid-clip picket is to create the strength of a Deadman with nearly the speed of placement of a vertically placed top clip picket. So let's take a look at how to place these. So first, similar to before, I want to think about my snowpack. If my snowpack has a lot of air in it, it has weak layers, then this may not be my first choice of picket. But in almost all other circumstances, if I need a bomber anchor and I need one relatively quickly, then I'll place this. Even if I don't need it quickly, it's just faster to create than a Deadman. So first, I'm going to find vertical. In this placement, I want back further than 10 degrees. I'm going to push this back to 20 to 25 degrees. That, again, is relative to the angle of the snow, measuring this angle here. Okay, and now I'm going to pound that in. And I'm going to pound that in just until the cable is on the surface of the snow. Okay, now I'm going to use this cable sort of as a measure for about how far out I need to go. I'm going to need to go right out to there. And I'm going to use the pick of my tool to draw as straight a line as I can from the T part of my picket all the way out, which is creating a slot for my wire to go in. If you didn't have a wire or a cable attached to your picket, you could certainly use a double or triple length sling girth hitched into that hole as well. That would also work. And I'm trying to get this down so that when this picket is pounded all the way to the hilt, all the way up to the top, this slot that I'm creating is still deep enough for this picket cable to rest in. So it needs to go down a little ways. Okay, pound that in. Okay, now this picket needs to be set. So it's kind of like setting a nut, you know, for trad climbers. I'm going to clip it into my belay loop, and I'm going to get down right along the snowpack as low as I can go, and I'm going to try to pull back and in line with the picket. If you have two people to work with, it's nice if one of them steps on the picket while the other one pulls to set it, okay? Okay, so now it's pretty well set. The other thing you can do is you can also backfill this section here and tamp that down, which will add a little bit more strength to this picket as well. So what we've done with this particular picket is we've captured, instead of a horizontal column of snow, we've captured a vertical column of snow. And because of the placement back at an angle, like this, clipped in the middle, as the cable pulls from the middle of the picket, the sliding action of the picket can cause it to drive deeper into the snowpack and secure more purchase in the snow, provided there's not great inconsistencies in the snowpack, like a soft or unconsolidated layer with a very, very knife-hard ice layer layered between. That gives a really strong, fast placement that oftentimes can be used as a single bomber placement to rappel off of. Sometimes you can do crevasse rescue off a single vertically placed mid-clip picket. Okay, so one situation that you might encounter is that the snow is too soft for a solid placement. This is really common in early season when temperatures at night and in the day are below freezing, or in winter in particular, and also in a continental snowpack or at altitude, like if you're climbing in Alaska where you have a continental snowpack and altitude in the Alaska range. It makes a very unconsolidated snowpack that makes for very insecure vertical placements. So what you need to do is you need to work hard in the snow. Work hardening simply means to stamp down or compress the snowpack in order to eliminate airspace and get some of those snow crystals to start to bond to each other to create a more stable block of snow that would have to be propelled through the snowpack to create anchor failure. So there's a really simple way to do that. If this is my picket I'm going to place in an aerated snowpack, I probably would not opt for a vertical placement. I may opt for horizontal placement, such as a Deadman anchor. So I'll use this as my measuring tool. I'll place this down. I'll place this right down, and then I'm going to measure out. I like to say about 1 meter or 3 feet in front, or at least the dimensions of the picket itself. This is a 2 foot or 24-inch picket. If I had a longer picket, I'd want to do it more. Okay, I'm probably using a larger picket because the snowpack is less consolidated, like an Alaskan snowpack. So I'll just draw like a box or a square that looks like it's about the same dimensions. And failure oftentimes results in moving a part of the snowpack that looks a little bit like this. So it's not a bad idea to even work harden out on this sort of rhombus shape, like that. Okay? Is that a rhombus? I can't even remember. It's been too long since I've been in geometry. Okay, and now I'm going to stamp to work harden this surface with my feet. If I'm a solo rescuer and I'm working in an aerated snowpack, then I probably cannot stand up and stamp this out. So I need to do my work hardening with my hands. It can be a little difficult, but it can be very important if you're a solo rescuer, because you want that first piece of protection that you place to be bomber enough for you to build a second anchor without having to hold the load so much. Okay, so I'm going to stamp. This snowpack is not very indicative of a snowpack that would need to be work hardened. It's pretty water saturated. A lot of the air is gone. But Again, in a more aerated snowpack, like something you would like to powder ski, then it's going to be super essential to stamp it down. Okay, so I stamp that down. And now I'm going to start my anchor, which would be at the very back. Okay, so here we're going to take a look at a Deadman anchor, which is kind of a classic snow anchor that's well known. Deadman anchor is ideally suited to those snowpacks that do well with work hardening. So work hardening, just a couple mentions about this. Work hardening works really well with aerated snowpacks that have some moisture content. If you've got a lot of facets or depth hoar, if you try to compress that stuff, you're just going to pound more air into the snowpack, and those crystals are not going to bind. So if you start to punch through quite a bit in the snowpack, then you probably know if you're hitting air pockets or not, and whether those air pockets are full of things like depth hoar. And then work hardening would be to avoid it. But in this case, let's say we had a little bit of air in the snow. Here in the Northwest, we've got a fair amount of moisture. It's typically not cold and clear with a shallow snowpack, which produces that hoarfrost, or the depth hoar, so work hardening might do some good, and then we might want to place a horizontal Deadman anchor. Now, another time where a horizontal Deadman is a really good choice is if you are a solo rescuer. And the reason for that is the other anchor type that I'm going to show, which is a Midclip picket, you need to be able to set and have a fair amount of distance much of the time in order for it to be set up well. Sometimes you can do that as solo rescuer, and sometimes it's more challenging. Okay, so we're going to take a look at a classic Deadman. So right here is the work hardened area, provided I need to work harden. Again, this particular snowpack probably wasn't necessary. And I leave the picket on the surface as a measuring tool, and so I can gauge how big I need to make my slot. And I'm going to use the adds tool primarily to dig. So I'm going to start beyond the edge of the picket, and first I'll kind of just start with my trench by measuring it out, okay? And then I'm going to start just going down and down and down, and I'm going to need to make that slot wider than the picket, because I'm not able to dig that deep otherwise, and I need to make it a little bit longer than the picket, because as you dig, the sides of your snow trench are going to be shaped kind of like this. Good thing to mention that a Deadman anchor is also commonly called a T-trench, which I'll show why in a moment. Okay. So obviously, if you need to place one of these, time is almost always of the essence, even if you're placing it as running protection, because they take a long time to build. Now, the depth that you're looking for, I'd say a maximum depth of about 30 centimeters or 1 foot, simply because it takes so much longer to dig deeper, unless you're in really unconsolidated continental snowpack with soft layers on top and you've got a denser layer underneath, and you might want to dig deeper. But here I typically go from, say, maybe 7 or 8 inches minimum to 12 inches maximum, so kind of in that range. Okay. Making sure that the depth is consistent all the way across. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is identify my direction of pull, and then I'm going to undercut the lip, okay, in the direction of pull. So if my direction of pull is that way, then I'm going to dig this out. If you want to come in here nice and close and see. I'm going to dig this out. So my axe is turned at an angle, and I'm undercutting. And that way, if there is a slight upward pull, which sometimes can happen, especially if you're managing an anchor or belaying and standing above it while you yourself are anchored to it, it can mitigate some of that upward pull. Okay, so I've undercut that. Now I'm going to place this in the hole and push it forward so it's set properly. Okay, and now this strand here, I'm using, kind of marking where that strand is going to go. And you can see here, I'm using the pick of my tool because I want this part to be as narrow as possible. And the difficult part, or one of the more difficult parts about this, is I want to make sure that I get the T part. So again, T trench, you can see this T shape. I want the stem of this T to be at least as deep as the picket itself. Okay? I want it to be nice and long. Okay? So there we go. We've gotten that down at least as deep as the picket itself. Set that double length sling down in there like this. This could also be a triple length runner, or even a quad length sling if you need a lot of extension. Of course, cordelette works well too. And now that's set. Okay? And I could clip this in. Now, backfilling the T-trench, it's a matter of preference. Backfilling does not necessarily make the anchor any stronger in its intended direction of pull, with one exception, and that is backfilling the stem of the T itself. Okay, so disturbing this snow here, this is some of the snow that is providing stability, especially if I work hardened it. So to backfill this part of the T, which is one of the only points of weaknesses here, you can simply move snow from outside, fill that in. But in general, this is excessive because a T slot is very strong, even without backfilling the T. This 24-inch picket in this type of snowpack is more than strong enough for the forces I'm dealing with. So whether or not you want to backfill, a lot of times depends on your perception of the strength of your anchor and the type of snowpack you're working in. Same is true of backfilling the space directly above the picket. That doesn't add any structure or integrity to the strength of the anchor itself, but does protect it somewhat against an upward pull. Okay? But obviously that slows you down significantly when you need to clean your anchor. So you need to make a judgment call as when you decide whether you're going to backfill. This last anchor that we're going to talk about is simply a different rendition of a Deadman anchor. And this is showing probably the most common alternative to using a picket, which is to Deadman an ice axe or an ice tool. But keep in mind, this technique can be done with any long, solid item, such as trekking poles. You might want to either insert them into themselves if they're multi-shaft poles that can be extended and reduced in size, or you might want to fold them if they're a folding style pole. Skis also will work really well and perform very well in soft, unconsolidated snow, even if there's facets, obviously. So here we're going to use an ice tool, a modular ice tool. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find the balancing point. So that's about the balancing point there, up toward the head of the axe. That's going to allow me to get a similar amount of surface area on each side, so that as the axe starts to pull into the anchor, it doesn't become lopsided as if it was attached down here. You can imagine that pull could start to lever this out on one side. So I'm going to attach a piece of material. So here my buddy Ryan has this pretty sweet new style of sling, which is just basically sewn cord. And I'm going to make a clove hitch here. This also works with regular style double length Dyneema runner, nylon runner, cordelette, doesn't matter. I make a clove hitch close to the sew bar or the attachment, bringing this loop together. And I'm going to put that over on my axe to that balancing point. So that was that balancing point right there. I'm going to cinch that down. And now with these two legs of the clove hitch, I'm going to flip those around the head of the axe so that the clove hitch will bite down hard when it's under load and make it so that the hitch does not ride up or down the axe. The more load it takes, the more friction I'm going to gain on and holding power on that axe. And now I place this in my T-trench, the same as I normally would. When undercutting, it's good to make sure you compensate for the size of the head on the undercut on that size. And I'm going to place it pick down, okay? I might place it at just a slight angle with the pick as well. So I'm going to angle that pick just like that as I place it in. Minor point, not that important. Make sure that's set well. Pull it forward. And there we go. Good to go. This would be a really common way to back yourself up if you're doing a seated belay off of an ATC or even a hip belay while you're sitting in the snow. You'd be attached back to this anchor with the climbing rope and then belaying from a stance backed up with a picket. However, this particular axe in this snow is strong enough for a direct belay with one client in steep snow, no problem.